Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. MiOsc is back with another podcast episode. Today, we dive into martial arts philosophy, exploring the interplay between internal and external elements. Whether we're doing explosive movements of Kung Fu or meditative flowing Tai Chi, these principles extend far beyond training. They influence our approach to life, work, and personal growth. True mastery in martial arts and in life comes from integrating both the internal and external. And in our own journeys, finding this balance means knowing when to push forward, when to step back, and when to exert effort and when to embrace stillness. Through this episode, we reflect on how martial arts philosophy is not just about self-defense, but self-awareness. By embracing both external discipline and internal wisdom, we cultivate not only strong bodies, but strong minds and spirits as well. I've been enjoying these conversations and hope you have too. If you have, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. I'd love to hear how you balance the internal and external elements in your own life. Leave us a comment below or reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Oscar.
Hello, Mimi.
It's actually been a minute since our last MiOsc episode, but our episodes have been the most prevalent in addition to some of my solo podcasts. But listeners, have no fear. I have actual guest speakers on my podcast in the next few weeks. I've already recorded one today, so that's a win.
I think that's going to make a lot of people happy.
That is not just you and I, or just me.
Correct.
Just me on the Sifu Mimi Chan show.
Can't spell me without Mimi. No, you can't spell Mimi without me.
I don't know if people know this, but the history of the Sifu Mimi Chan show has roots in Oscar being right over me, which is pretty big deal.
And extremely rare.
So this originally in 2016, when I was like, okay, we're going to do this podcast, changed it over from its original title, which was Culture Chat. Because at that time, I was really taking this specific angle on keeping tradition alive in a modern world, as well as after that first time, 45 one, and being so upset, I thought, wow, we want to make sure we're telling immigrant stories. We want to make sure we're telling marginalized community stories, and just really talking a lot about culture. So, and you said you should just make it, the Mimi Chan show, or just like your name, so that, and I thought it was I thought it sounded conceited, or like it would be perceived a certain way. And so that's why I hesitated, but you were right. It just works out better because it really becomes more of just like my voice and what I'm talking about. And that's often what this podcast ends up being.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the reason why, but the reason I can think of now is why I would say that is because on social media, I was Wallem Fit and then Control Your Health. And if I were to take it all back, I would just be Oscar Agramante. Because then anything that I post would just be, this is just me, as opposed to this company-facing.
I think you could change it. Not that you care, because you don't really.
Yeah, I really don't care. But I think that's probably why.
What you mean conceptually?
Conceptually, yeah. I mean, conceptually, I think that's why I probably told you at that time, because when you started the podcast, probably already had Wallem Fit, and then I was like, oh, I'm changing it to Control Your Health, and then I was like, you know what, I should have just made it just Oscar or whatever, and say this is just what I do. But in the grand scheme of things, for myself, none of that matters, because I think most of these social media companies and the way that we use them is complete bullshit.
All right. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole, because we've done it before. And I feel like the word culture, though, there was kind of something to that. Like I really liked culture chat because of even though is it alliteration if the C is a different sound? Grammar experts out there, please help me. I need to know. But anyway, I kind of liked it visually anyway, in the logo and how it looked, and it made sense at the time. And I was trying to veer away from being like self-branded. And at the time, I also was wanting a voice separate of my Sifu Mimi voice in a sense. And then as things escalated, I realized, no, actually, F you, everybody. I am who I am. And if you don't like it, that's too bad. I kind of the persona just melded into like, no, of course I have a professional persona, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of the advocacy, activism, and things that I have spoken out about, it doesn't matter to me that Sifu Mimi also says that. I think people have to reckon with like, that's also who I am. And that was a hard thing. And of course, maybe one of the only positive things to come out of the current administration at that time, 2016, was that I just realized, you know what? People are going to have to accept that we feel the way we feel about immigration and equality and women's rights and LGBTQ rights and all these other things, all these things that we often talk about. And so I feel like I just kind of threw it all out the window. And now as we fast forward to reliving the second, what is a living nightmare of every day, we try to avoid hearing all of the negativity. But in our little bubble, one thing I talked about on my last podcast solo was the We Are Family, We Are Wallam Family podcast. I thought that was going to be a nice moment to share that positive things are happening every day, but also we're in our Wallam bubble kind of almost all the time, and literally in our compound of our Wallam world. And then also in our Wallam international world, we kind of just are able to exist with the principles and the people. And one of the things that was central to that episode was how important the relationships and the people and who make up Wallam. Because of course, Wallam is a Kung Fu style, but without practitioners and without people who are keeping it alive, then it doesn't exist.
Right. I guess what's really cool about the Wallam system and every person that's a part of it, is how it spans all different types of people, ideas, philosophies, political affiliations, and so having a broad community like that does make you then see that some of the things that we hear that can be anger-inducing are sometimes just out there just for that. Obviously, there's things that are actually horrible that happen, but realizing that you're part of this big community that is following one system Wallam, but also in their personal lives there's so much different things that they believe, and it makes things more gray as opposed to black and white. And so I've appreciated that.
Yeah. And today we thought we would talk about, kind of the, if you know, like members only. Yeah, we have Wallam members only jackets. It doesn't say members only, and it's not the actual brand, but basically we generally only really allow our Wallam students, like members, to have our uniform. And, we do have memorabilia and different types of shirts and stuff like that we wear on different occasions. But basically, interestingly enough, I chose to wear Control Your Health today, because I'm representing you and you're wearing Wallam. Very nice. But I thought it would be cool to kind of talk about one of the big principles in our Wallam Kung Fu Members Only Handbook. So those of you who are not Wallam members, this actually could still be really, hopefully, interesting to you, because there's a lot of just kind of martial historical content in terms of theory and philosophy, but also how one of the things that we always talk about in our martial practice is how do we apply those principles to our everyday life. And we've been really slacking on the Kung Fu Pods lately, which are our video podcasts where we kind of delve in and give like a 5-minute, hey, you could do this if you want to achieve this really quick, and just kind of show some stuff. Maybe we'll put that on our to-do list. But in those Kung Fu Pods, the big theme is, of course, like how do you apply your Kung Fu to your everyday life, and also how do you kind of integrate that. And one of the things in this book that we have are questions, and they are our history and philosophy questions. It's our kind of our written part of the test that we like for students to just be able to know a little bit about our historical context. And one of the things that's so challenging is the translation from English to Chinese, of course, because that's always problematic. And if you guys have watched any international film ever from Hong Kong or China or anything, and you are actually a native speaker, you know that those subtitles aren't correct. And yet they still interpret it that way, because I think sometimes you're just trying to get the point across and you can't be so literal. And I've realized to be less critical of that, because that is often the case. Like, you don't have a lot of time as things get flashed on the screen, or as you go to teach and you do things, and it can't always be a literal translation. And things are lost in translation all the time, but we do the best we can to interpret that and try to hold on to the meaning. And one of the things in the book that we talk about here are the internal and external elements in a movement. And, it is on this page, but external movements, of course, refer to like our physicality, and internal is more about like our body system and like kind of what's happening on a less physical scale. And so what we talk about during our martial training is that in every movement, there are 5 things externally and internally happening all at one time.
Easy.
I feel like there's very few practitioners I've ever seen live that can embody that, because it's almost this unobtainable thing to be able to think about, process, and execute that. So that means some of it has to be where you're not thinking about it, right? And so our external elements, and they're all kind of like a poem, right, is our hand, eyes, foot, body, and technique. And that means that we are utilizing all the things, Sangan, Sun, Fat, Bo, right, in Cantonese. And that alone is already a challenge without thinking about anything internally that's happening.
Yeah. So I've seen 2 people express that all 10 elements when I was really young. One, of course, Bruce Leroy, and the second person was Shonuff, but it wasn't in that order. Right, Shonuff got the glow first, and then Bruce Leroy got the glow, and that's how they were expressing it. Okay. You didn't know that where that was going.
I didn't. And then when you said Bruce Leroy, I still was a little bit confused, because we call someone Bruce Leroy. So right. I was like, wait, what? You knew him when you were little? Got it. So we yet again find ourselves talking about The Last Dragon on this show, where I think listeners, if you want to be amused, you can go to every MiOsc episode and try to count how many times Shonuff or Bruce Leroy or The Last Dragon has been referenced and or quoted. More than necessary. Okay, so externally, that's kind of where I feel like you have a deep understanding because of your fitness background, strength and conditioning, and having just this connectivity to your body. And I wanted to bring this up because we went to do some like kind of professional strength and conditioning training to learn how to coach in a certain system. And I remember one of the first things I asked about, because our internal elements, of course, are energy, spirit, respiratory strength, force, and power of attainment. This gunlick, which is so hard to explain or quantify in English. But one of the first things I asked about was, okay, well, what is the breathing pattern during this movement? And this was a long time ago.
When was 2014.
Okay, 2014. So at that time, the answer to me was like, oh, well, that's not really that important, or we don't really focus on that. And I'm like, as a martial artist, it's like, for me, the breathing is one of the first things that we learn. I know in Tai Chi, it's the same thing when you guys on the Tai Chi side talk about first, we get in the position, but basically we're getting in a position to breathe. And so I found it really interesting because everything felt very external in the strength and conditioning world. And I think that's shifted over time.
So you're referring to when we went to go train with Mike Boyle, and actually what had happened was Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning and that group of people were excellent strength coaches. And around that time, they had shifted to focusing on the importance of breath work. So the answer that we had gotten at first from Mike Boyle himself was, oh, in the past, I was like, what are you talking about? Why would we need to talk about breathing? Everyone's breathing already. Otherwise, you'd be dead. But he admitted that after learning more, the importance of breathing. Now, when it comes to his philosophy recently, I did hear him say, sometimes when you're coaching someone on strength training and you start coaching them, oh, make sure you inhale here, exhale there, that can become confusing, especially for a newer person. Mm-hmm. But I think as you get more advanced, you would dial that in. So that's the way that I coach. And a lot of that comes from the work of Pavel Tsatsouline, who now runs Strong First, and all of the great coaches that have come from that school. That school has always talked about and prioritized breath work. And it has a very martial aspect, probably more of a hard style type of martial arts, like karate or taekwondo style of breathing with the movements. Mm-hmm. But it translates very well to any martial art. So they've always done that. Mm-hmm. The fitness community got on a big breathing kick 10 to 11 years ago. And to Mike Boyle's credit, he's the type of person who gets information, will see if it makes sense to him, and will admit when he's wrong or admit where he needs to implement things. But he's also has often said in fitness, the pendulum is always swinging. Mm-hmm. So people catch on a trend and the pendulum swings, and everyone's doing this now. Mm-hmm. Everyone's doing this very specific type of thing, and you throw out the baby with the bathwater, and then it swings back to normal, or it could swing too far back, and eventually we get to where it's a balanced approach. Yeah,
so. You're right. One of the things that I think is amazing about Mike Boyle that taught me at that time to say, oh, wait, just because we've been always doing it one way doesn't mean that's how it always has to be done. He really opened my eyes to that. But I think this basically just shows how bad my physicality was when he's like, yeah, don't worry about your breathing. Just do this.
I mean, if that's what you remember.
That probably was my movement. Well, I remember also then several days later, they started to talk about, someone came in talking about breathing. And that was just literally that week that had happened, where there was a bit of a shift. But I remember not him, it wasn't him, it was another coach. It was like, oh, that's not really that important at the moment. Or maybe it was at the moment.
And it almost always isn't that important. Speaking of strength training, right? You have someone who's trying to get some healthy movement in for whatever reason. And if you're doing something that's not too challenging as far as a sub-maximal load, or you're not doing very high reps, then that isn't the priority probably when they're triaging, right? Like, okay, what's the order that we need to do? And that might have been the philosophy of that coach. But I have a feeling that if you were to do heavier weights or start getting into higher reps, then they would start, telling you what to do there, or instinctively that would kick in. My philosophy has almost always been to start with the breath work from the warm up and moving forward. So, yeah.
So kind of talking about these internal and external element poems then, one of the things that I think is fascinating is that it's very specifically written out, and this is just some philosophy / information that my dad has always had in the books. So this has always been a page in the Wallem handbooks for as long as I can kind of remember. And I think a lot of other martial artists probably have kind of similar philosophies of what's happening, because they are actual kind of poems. And I think martially, as we think about that connectivity to, people get a little bit woo-woo with the mind, body, spirit, and all of that. But I think this very much almost in a scientific way can say like, look, our energy can be seen to be something like endurance, right? It doesn't have to just be your chi or your like your this force that you can't see, right? It literally could be like the energy you need to continuously be moving and working. And then your spirit, like we talk about martial spirit, and that's not just your expression in your movement, but like the yelling part of it and having kind of an essence of it. So I feel like even though these things are sort of intangible, it's not necessarily so disconnected from if you were going to do any other kind of movement. Like you see people who are playing tennis and they're like grunting when they hit the ball, or you see like gymnasts and they take that, huge leap, and then you can feel their force, right? You can feel their power coming through. And so I think it's interesting because this can really, to me, be applied to almost all movement-based practice.
Yeah.
And then from a practical or from a day-to-day aspect, like what are your thoughts on how our internal and external elements kind of move together?
So you're right. I think the 5 external elements, 5 internal elements. So let's talk about the 10 total elements that are there. You could, if you're focused and self-aware, you could implement that in every single physical activity movement that you do. It can even be something that is static. So all of those could be done in a very still practice like Qigong or even meditation. And I think if we were to even move it towards something that you maybe wouldn't consider a movement aspect, but it does involve movement, something that you talked with someone about in one of your podcasts about the correlation between martial arts and even painting or calligraphy. So yeah, anything that I think an artist would do, you could incorporate these things. But it's a pretty broad term. So we could go through all 10 elements and then say, here's an example of how to use that for anything. Here's an example of it in Kung Fu. Here's an example of it in maybe a fighting situation. Here's an example of it in doing calligraphy, like I said, or maybe what you do is you do beautiful woodwork. I don't know. So we can go through those and explain it. But if you were to look at those things and practice it, then once you have that type of understanding, then that can translate or bleed over towards anything else in your life.
Yeah. And I think that's where, of course, the challenge is. And people get very caught up in the technical aspect. So when we have a Kung Fu student or Tai Chi student come in, they're just trying to move, right? They're just trying to figure out how to use their hands, eyes, and like most of the time they can't do everything at the same time. So I think one thing that I've been thinking about lately is how to not compartmentalize, prioritize perhaps is the word. And that sometimes the word priority is deceiving because it means one thing is more important than the other. But I think it's the concept of juggling, where every time whatever ball is in the air, that's being prioritized as the next one you're going to catch is the next priority. And then if you can imagine that that's happening all the time in everything we're doing. So like, not that any one of these elements are more important than the other, but we have to be able to prioritize them if we can't execute them all at the same time. So for example, like we tell our students, hey, just pick one internal and one external element to kind of work at one time. And that concept, I think, is what's really important here, more so than every element. But like, I know you and I sometimes will read something and it will resonate and then it'll connect back to some sort of Kung Fu philosophy that we have. And so when I read this, hand, eyes, body, technique, and your footwork. It to me, I see like a Kung Fu movie, and I see like the Shaw Brothers action and
Kung Fu theater is real. Yeah. As someone is continuously trying to make me, agree to that statement.
And so I think it's kind of fun to think about how do we then layer this into like our lives. And so I think from a very almost silly but practicality as we think about our external elements just being our body and just kind of having awareness. I was thinking about this just now. It came to me that we just got off of a plane. We came to Boston. We went to Boston, came home, and just like awareness of your body, having good personal space. Like if you are moving through the aisle, that means that someone coming towards you, you have to step out of the way, and just like the little things about like knowing where your body is at all times and being able to control that. The lack of that in society is kind of astounding.
Yeah. I always, it's easy to blame phones, but I think people have just always been that way. So if you're walking through life and interacting with an environment, you can do it multiple ways. And one way is I'm just thinking of myself and getting to my destination or whatever it is. And the other way could be maybe a little bit more self-awareness and awareness of the people around you. But yeah, I mean, those things are lacking if you see them, if you're looking for them, or if they really bump into you. So usually, as an example, when I'm driving, you're always like, wow, you're so patient. Oscar
does not use his horn. Unless he's hungry.
So yesterday there were 2 times, right? Where one time we were driving and someone didn't necessarily cut in front of me. They just kind of slowly swerved in front of me.
Basically would have probably moved into you had you not slowed down.
Right. And my thought was like, wow, maybe those people in that car are really high or something.
It was very unsafe.
And so I just kind of lightly put my brakes. They got in front of me, then they turned and I kept going. And then later on in that night, I was hungry, and
we were at the stoplight.
We were at a stoplight, and the light turned green, and I just counted to like 3. I was like, and at 3, I don't even honk the horn. I kind of just like bump it, like beep beep.
Right. Well,
and you said
that's not laying into it.
And you said, "Wow, you must be really hungry because you honked the horn." And
yeah.
I was like,
Normally he would wait 10 seconds.
So, I guess my point is. If you are looking for those instances, you will always find them. They will always be there. They will never not be there. And I guess I choose most of the time not to look for instances that will annoy me.
All right. Well, back to the elements.
But so the external elements, the 5 external elements: hand, eyes, body, technique, footwork is the order that it's written out in the poem. But really, hand, eyes, body, footwork are the 4 elements, and technique, the 5th element, is really a combination of the 4. So are there really 5 external elements or are there 4, right? And so you can translate that to something like you're about to punch someone in the face because you got out of the car because they cut you. they cut you off and you were mad. You need to use your eyes, sharp-sighted, to see where
you're going to punch.
Where are you going to punch?
Where do I want to hit this person?
Your hand should be moving at free will, which I think has this like the intention of where it's going, but also this free will also could be that it's reactionary, right? That maybe your hands, because through training, have learned that pattern of throwing a punch. Your body is relaxed. That allows the transfer of power to, right? Your footwork should be fast. So if you're throwing a punch, you're pushing from the foot through, and then the technique would be all of that. So if you saw someone throw a punch at someone else's face and land it really well, you could say, wow, that was a really good punch, but you're talking about the technique, all 4 elements. And then someone who's very skilled or maybe has experienced it was like, wow, that person's eyes were sharp-sighted, their hands moved at free will, their feet were moving fast, their body was relaxed, and overall, it caused this beautiful technique of punching someone who cut you off in the face.
Which Oscar would never, ever do.
No, I've gotten out of the car and calmed people down like, we don't need to fight about this. Is ridiculous.
He's so zen that there will people that like just road rage. Thank goodness nobody like came and shot you, but like road rage when you're like, look, I'm really sorry. Look, I'm on my spare tire, or I'm sorry, I have, an elderly in the car. Whatever it is, he's always been able to like chill and de-escalate. He's a really great de-escalator, unless he's hungry. Then stay out of the way.
At the minimum, I got those Tic Tacs in the car.
I'm more fearful for like my arm or something if he really got hungry and came down to it. So yeah, I think what's interesting for people is thinking like those are the easy ones, right? Those are the easy ones. Like, okay, as a martial artist, you can define them. Like, oh, okay, when I'm going to do my Kung Fu today, I'm going to make sure my eyes are looking where they're supposed to be. My hands are in the right position, that I'm paying attention. My footwork, my stances are grounded, and I'm all the things. And the technique is like that movement, the transitions, and then your body is in a good position, and all, that one's like, you can almost say, fix this, and you know how. Whereas internally, and I feel like this applies to life too, like with our body, if my hair is bothering me and it's like, whatever, I can cut it and it's whatever. If my hair is turning all white because my students have aged me and drive me crazy, I'm just kidding. It's not just the students. It's like life. I can diet. If, like physically you can change things. Mm-hmm. You can make adjustments. You can see the issues. Like internally, I feel like that's like the challenge between body and mind. Like that's often what people ask is what's harder, like something physical or something mental. And you always say, oh, well, the mental game is definitely the most challenging thing, or you're burning all these calories, or that's much more exhaustive than even something very physically challenging. And I think the internal side, where we're addressing words like energy and spirit and respiratory strength, I feel like almost can go physical, because you can actually see your lungs in your mind, and you could see like, oh, here's what's happening. The air comes in, or you're expending, and like there's something more connected for people, because I guess there's a visual force and power of attainment. It's took years for us to figure this stuff out, by the way, but it's a lot less tangible, and I think a lot less definable for people.
Yeah. So the interesting thing with the poem, right, is that it's written in Chinese. So the order of the poem for external hand, eyes, body, technique, footwork, that's just the order of how it's written.
Because it sounds right.
Because and I think there's
like
something
the rhythm of it.
To that, the poetic rhythm of it. And then the internal element, the order of it is energy, spirit, respiratory strength, force, power of attainment. Mm-hmm. So if I could make it all sound right, I think that I would, yes, probably put respiratory strength in between the two, because your breath work is the only thing that you have complete control over and don't have any control over. So when you're sleeping, you're just breathing. It's an involuntary action. And when you're awake, unless you're paying attention, you're breathing and you're not thinking about it. But you could, as long as you focus on it, immediately tune into this system of respiratory system and change the speed that you breathe, how deep your breath is, how long you exhale, how forceful you exhale. And so it's this magical skill, breath work, which combines the involuntary and voluntary actions, maybe internal, external. And that's why it's super important. So I would definitely put respiratory strength in the order of priority of combining external and internal elements, like right there as the bridge. Like to me, that makes sense. But if we look at now, and I'll just come up with this exactly, thinking about punching someone in the face who cut me off and saying, let's go through the internal elements of this.
The interesting analogy.
Well, just giving that analogy, right? Staying with the theme. So respiratory strength should be smooth and deep. I mean, to go back to your point of like, well, how do I breathe when executing this? When you're throwing a punch, you should be kind of exhaling at the end of that.
So inhaling right before.
Inhaling. And the cool thing with inhaling is you can take an inhaling breath and start setting your body up to be braced. And then at the end of your exhale, you've created this tension in the center of your body, which then allows for a nice transmission of force, which is kind of cool. Energy should be great and enduring. The cool thing, if it's just one punch, hopefully you don't need so much energy, right? But let's say this becomes a full-out brawl. You want to make sure that you're able to throw more than one punch,
but you
right?
also have to have the energy to even throw the first punch.
You have to have the energy to throw the first. Your spirit, you should be high in spirit. So I would describe this in the martial arts aspect as part of like this yelling. Like if we can use another analogy of like the samurai who's got the sword, he's like, that like they've got this martial spirit.
I would say spirit saved my life.
Yeah. Yes. And also sometimes, not to get too philosophical, eyes being the windows of the soul, right? But your spirit can be shown through your eyes as well. Mm. So that the intention of your martial intent of that spirit can be shown, can be kind of projected through the physical aspect of the eyes, right? Then we have the force. Obviously, you need to be able to transmit a certain amount of force. There's all kinds of force with Star Wars, obviously, but in the poem it says that your force should be full and resourceful. So in class yesterday, we were practicing kicking the bags, and we talk always about like your aim should not be to end the strike at the bag. It should be kicking through the bag. So that's showing that you have this.
Force equals mass times acceleration. The only thing I remember from physics.
Yeah. So again, super important why it's important to know these basics, right? So you have to have the force to use your mass and acceleration as well. And then power of attainment, again, is similar to the external element where 4 of the elements are one thing, and then the 5th element is kind of, hey, this is the combination of everything. The power of attainment is your energy, spirit, respiratory strength, and force all appearing as a result of the acquisition of this. So
so hard to quantify, though.
Very hard to quantify. And
I see it as like all of things being able to happen simultaneously, but within your power and control. Like the fact that you are making all of that happen versus like luck or just something by accident. Like you're actually in control of all of the elements. Like you're able to harness them. So
even though I've used that, kind of silly analogy of punching someone in the face, one punch executed really well. If you're a fighter, you can imagine a cross, right? But in Kung Fu, when we do our side punching, turning side punching, that done really well, you can break down every single one of those 10 elements. You can say, wow, all those external elements, the technique was really good. Mm-hmm. Wow, all of those internal elements, the power of attainment was really there in that one punch. And sometimes you can see it. Like you can physically see, I joked about The Last Dragon earlier, but really your father is, Grandmaster Chan is really the embodiment of this. Like he would sometimes do demonstrations. He would sometimes do demonstrations that are pretty short, sometimes long, sometimes short, of showing things. But it didn't take much. It could be just one move, and you're like, wow, that encapsulated all of those things. Well, the first
word of it is the Kung and the Kung Fu, right? So it's kind of like the essence of Kung Fu, really. If it's the working of the hard work, it's the it's the power of attainment.
Yeah, I remember one time listening to someone talk about the Band of Brothers speech by Shakespeare, and hearing it and going, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And then that person took every single word and described it, and then they read it again, and I was like, holy smokes, this is very, very deep. And the difference with this is that we could be explaining it to someone who hasn't implemented it, but the external and internal elements need to be practiced. So we can philosophize on what all of this means, but it may mean different things for different people, but you will only truly get an understanding of it by practicing it.
Yeah, this is like a wannabe chef saying, well, I have all the secret ingredients. does you no good if you don't actually practice making the recipe, or you actually put it into implementation and you actually execute, because you can think you have the ingredients or the recipe to something, and unless you make it, your favorite thing is food, right? So in theory, you could have the perfect recipe with all the exact directions and the exact measurements, and I could tell you it doesn't mean your cake is going to come out the way you think it's going to, or it doesn't mean that is going to come out the only way is through practice.
Yeah, I remember that you saying wannabe chefs makes me think of like 20 years ago, I was working in the office and this one guy came in, and I don't know how else to say it except he just had this asshole vibe, but he came and watched a class and asked these questions and said that he practiced martial arts. And I looked at him, I was like, wow. I used to say things like, wow, this person's very soft. Like, you touch them, you're like, wow, they're very soft and they practice martial arts. But someone who thought very highly of himself. And what he ended up doing was he stole one of our handbooks.
Yes, he stole it. Literally stole it.
Like he asked to grab the book. And then I was working in the office and I had to deal with other people. And then he left and I realized, he walked out with the book. And so that person is a wannabe chef. Right? He saw the value.
3 or 4 episodes ago, everybody, to all the, what is it, no frills Kung Fu masters out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of no frills Kung Fu masters. But I mean, is that person as bad as the person who is a student for a few months and then tries to start his own style? Probably not. But that's a person who
knows? We don't know what that person's doing with their book.
Yeah, maybe he did, right? But that's the type of person.
And he's a thief. That's actually, I don't know, is that a felon? You're like,
I don't know the definition, but that's the type of person who is a wannabe chef, right? And
like they think, oh wow, this is great. It has all this stuff in it, and so therefore I have all the answers. Like you have all the answers, but it doesn't mean you've learned anything.
Yeah, and I think it's similar to when 20 years ago we would, I don't know the exact year, when we would download things for free on the internet. It's like,
the Napster days.
Yeah, like I have access to all of these books or things. Okay, let me just grab it as much as I can. It's a philosophy of not emptiness, but just of how would you say, lack of resources, right? Like just someone who doesn't have.
Oh, scarcity.
It's a scarcity it's a scarcity type of mindset.
Yeah.
And it's the mindset. And so this is why I bring it up, because I've also been a culprit, right, of this. It's a mindset of, let me grab this information to have it because I need it, but I'm not going to actually put in the work. When you're able to just take something with no value exchange, then you're never really going to get the benefit from it. So this is why
I'd forgotten about that, Teef.
Yeah. Those are things I think about all the time.
Like I shouldn't have turned my back.
I guess thinking back, I wish that I had been like, hey, don't steal that book, right? Just because I got that vibe from him, right? But us going through this, if I were on the other side and heard someone reading this and go, okay, that makes perfect sense. Well, I would never really get the understanding if I didn't then try to apply it. And it's something with the Kung Fu side that I try to do, don't always succeed. And I think it's something on the fitness side that I succeed even less, because I'm bombarded with so much information. I like to hear things and then decide, am I going to implement it or not, right? So then you don't really get the true depth of it. But that's where, going back to what you said at the beginning, is prioritizing, right? Prioritizing what you're going to focus on.
That's interesting you say that, because I feel like in strength and conditioning and in fitness and in especially something like kettlebell specifically, I feel like you have a really great handle on being able to harness the technique and the power of attainment, meaning you've collectively been able to have a connective understanding and execution of these elements. Because really at the top of the page, it says 5 elements in any technique or movement. So it's not even saying a Kung Fu movement or a Tai Chi movement. It's any technique or movement, right? And so we think about, okay, I think we should kill your example right now of like punching someone in the face because they cut you off because but like beyond that, right, I really do feel like when you are doing your cat's ball exercises, but again, this is like neophyte me with no real eye for understanding if you're doing something right or wrong. I am not like, Brett Jones or anything like that.
Well, what's really cool with you saying that is, thank you, but I don't believe that. And the reason is, there's two examples. One is just recently, it's like, wow, we're just name dropping.
It's not our fault if we're like friends with these people.
My strength coach, teacher is Brett Jones.
I know.
So,
and frequent guest of this podcast.
Right. And a very funny person. He's very funny.
Very funny.
Very funny. Anyway.
Soon to go on his own stand-up tour.
Yeah. So, two instances recently is I haven't done a lot of barbell work. So I was like, well, let's try, here's something to work on and military press. And I remember saying, coach, my shoulder's bothering you. And I'm not even using that heavy weight. So maybe military press isn't for me. And he said, all right, cool. Let's just see it. And I just did it with the bar. I grabbed the bar. I did 1 rep, brought it down. And he goes, all right, set it down. I got it. Like 1 rep.
Stop.
He's like
my dad. Yeah, when I start my beginning, no, wrong.
Already first move, no good.
No good.
Yeah.
Quote, unquote, Grandmaster Pui Chan. Already first move, no good.
Brett's at that level with strength training, right? And so this is through Zoom, by the way, or FaceTime. And he goes, all right, I got it. Just adjust your hand position. You made me make 1 adjustment. Boom, did it. No discomfort. I was like, oh. And it's been a couple weeks of making that 1 change. And I've increased the weight every week with no shoulder pain.
Yeah.
And then the other instance was something that I've done a lot of, which is kettlebell snatches. And so he's like, all right, so what I want you to do is you're going to work on this move, part of his iron cardio thing that he created. And it was like a clean, a lunge, a press, a squat, and a snatch. So I did all that, and I set it down, and he says, yeah, but the way you did that snatch, the kettlebell, don't do this one thing. And he made a quick correction. And it's something that because the weight was submaximal, I didn't put all of the elements into it. I didn't dial in.
But that's asking for perfection all the time, which is a near impossibility. And that is why you show up to your coach or your sifu or your teacher or your whatever, the sensei or whoever it is in your world.
Well, I joke with him.
That is why you have an expert who is helping you on that journey. And I think it is good to do self-work and have time for yourself. But this is why it's important to have, if you're fortunate enough, a guide at that level, but like a teacher at that level, somebody that can be that. And we fortunately are also that for our students. I'm definitely not as intuitive as a teacher and learner as my father, but I am a more technical and I've had to put a different type of research, a different type of intent in order to be able to help my students in a similar way. I've had to do a different approach because I am just not him. We're very different teachers and practitioners, but it is interesting because we're literally practicing right now for tournaments. And so students are getting ready to dust off the rust and get ready to go, polish things and practice for tournament training. And that means a bit of a shift from your everyday training. It's a little bit different. And as soon as they do literally their first move, I'm like, all right, stop, forget it. I'm like, all right, we're not going on. I'll say, hey, I want to see 5 moves. And I'm like, never mind. We're just starting with the 1. We need
right.
To
I joked with Brett about that and said, yeah, you know what? Actually, Mimi does that all the time. When he did that to me, I started laughing, but it was this laughter of joy. I was like, man, it's so great to be corrected and to realize that you were doing something incorrectly, but that you can make this one simple adjustment and it makes all the difference.
Yeah.
And that is the benefit of having someone who is going to teach, coach, be your mentor, whatever you have. No judgment if you're not able to do that, right? Because it's a resource, right? Yeah. You have your resources. There are limited.
But in this day and age, internet being one of them, you do have a choice to pick the right resource that is available to you, because there are a lot of available resources. The library, for example, is a great resource. Not necessarily for movement, but there are things. I mean, you started your fitness journey through magazines and books.
Yeah, I mean, what's really cool now is on the fitness side, okay? Obviously, if I'm getting coached by Brett Jones, I'm a big fan of Strong First and their philosophies, right? What's really cool is they have a forum that you could, as any person, sign up for that forum and start posting your videos and say, hey, can anyone do a technique check? And you're going to get the best instructors of Strong First in the world who comment on you on all that technique for free. If that's what you wanted.
Yeah.
Or you could say, hey, I want to go, so that's a free option. And then if you wanted to pay for something more specific, you can do that as well.
Yeah.
Specifically for Wallum Kung Fu, for the Wallum style.
You're going to have to go to a Wallum school,
you're going to have to go to yes, you're going to go to
There's
Wallum.
no frills free version of Wallum.
Correct. So that's what I'm saying. There's not that, but that doesn't mean that if you want to learn something and you're doing it on your own, that's wrong. The first step is that you're doing it. Like if you're physically actually putting in work, that's awesome. If your intention is in the right place. But in anything, if you want to really excel, you have to train with other people and you have to have other eyes on you that will coach you up.
Yeah.
Because you may, you could video yourself and be checking your technique, but as someone who passed away a while back, Bob Elder, who was a good friend of you guys, and a martial artist of his own right, said after watching us do lion dance, he said, yeah, I mean, sure, you could you could try following people on YouTube to learn lion dance and waste 10 years, or you could just go to you guys and learn how to do it the right way from the first time. So it just depends. It depends on what your intention of your practice is, what your long-term intention is.
So kind of summing as we wrap up this episode, and we've talked a lot about philosophy, we've talked about punching people in the face, we've talked about kind of this what in, I think, martial training can sometimes be a very intangible and difficult it's just like a concept, and like putting that into practice and thinking about how can we put Kung Fu into our everyday lives. I think if we start to think about our external elements, like our body, and just what I had said earlier, even having awareness. I mean, just today, I decided to try to move a box with my foot, and I have a bit of a hip injury, and I use the leg that has that hip injury, and I didn't realize the box was going to be so heavy. I mean, just having a bit of awareness of your body and knowing like what you should or shouldn't be doing with it, and being able to just kind of have a moment of awareness and just being able to hold that space and saying, okay, here's what I can and should be doing with it, I think is important. And I think in terms of that internal side and just how we process, breathing is huge. You talked earlier about the expanding and then holding the air and like for executing something strong like a punch, but we also use the breathing to calm our nervous system down, for anxiety training, where we say like, this is the thing, the box breathing for not just de-escalation and anxiety, but like snipers and things like that use that to keep their heads level and to keep from physically like being able to like tremble or move, right? Like there's a specific reason we utilize our breathing. And I think that of all of the internal, that could be one that we all hyper focus on just enough throughout the day to make sure we are breathing. I remember one of my massage therapists, I think Fran once said, oh man, your scalings. That means you just, when you're breathing, maybe you're not breathing all the way down on a daily basis. And that's when we all carry this stuff in our shoulders and we get all tense. It's also because we're not allowing like the breath to settle. And we could call it chi. I mean, would you say the force is, I always thought the force in the Jedi stuff was like chi.
I would say that, but I am really the worst person to ask because I am not a Star Wars guy. I had a conversation with a client who was talking to me about Star Wars things, and I said, yep, fell asleep during that. Yep, also fell asleep during that one. And they're like, no, this one's good. I've also fell asleep during that. So, but to your point, I think it comes down to whatever you want to call it, self-awareness, intention, before you do something. That's why breathing is such a great bridge to all of those things. Like taking a breath could be it. I heard someone else say, I never believed in it before, but I pray before I do a podcast now, and it made me think of like, oh yeah, I'm this type of person who eats without any slowing down, and you see people who just take a pause and maybe they say a prayer, but that's them saying, oh, now I'm going to now eat this food with intention, right? So it could be just giving.
You can thank me.
Yeah, I could say I do usually thank you, but it's never before I eat, right? But I guess the point is almost anything that you can do, you can take a moment right before to then proceed to do the act that you're about to do with the right intention. It's a very Buddhist type of thing where they say, you don't
mindfulness.
Why can't you just wash the dishes and really enjoy the act of washing dishes without anything that's just disrupting you? But that could be translated to everything. So yes, you are right. We can take a moment before doing anything, approach it, and say, what is it that I want out of this thing that I'm about to do? Yeah.
All right. I would love to hear comments on this episode, especially if you had no idea what we were talking about and you thought that this was just a weird ramble session. But I really feel that a lot of students see this in the book and they just read through it and go. And then a lot of people in our daily lives that aren't martial artists perhaps don't maybe get a chance to have exposure to this type of philosophy or thought process. So we wanted to just bring it out and have a little conversation about it. It's also a lot of fun for Oscar and I to just do this because it basically gets our wheels turning on things where we actually do utilize this and prep for our classes and how are we going to set our intention for what we're going to do for the week. And so those of you out there who are listening, we appreciate you. We'd appreciate comments to let us know if you enjoyed the episode, if you have questions, and we'll do our best to kind of answer them. I want to thank all my Patreons out there. You guys rock. In my next episode, I think I do have a new one to thank publicly, but this has not been a very easy journey to keep all those juggling balls in the air and prioritize, but knowing the feedback that we do get and the listeners that we do have, appreciating the work that we do to make the time to do this, to have these conversations, to try to research, I still feel very compelled and driven and inspired to keep doing the work. So thank you guys. You are the ones that really help keep this going. And for those of you who are listeners, can't be Patreons quite yet, that's cool. No pressure, but we would love maybe a rating on our podcast so that more people can listen. The more people that listen, we do think it will have wider impact. So thank you so much, Oscar.
Thank you.
Oscar, as my family say. All right, until next time. Bye. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to The Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram or Facebook.